With this session update, I'm Shannon Lurkey. Citing a precipitous decline in civics education, a bipartisan coalition of lawmakers plus educational and civic leaders advocated for a bill that would require 11th and 12th grade students to take civics courses for credit as part of their high school education. Here's that press conference.
I'm Representative Dean Erdahl, and you are?
Steve Simon.
Aha! Met him for the first time.
Thank you.
Thank you. Former Supreme Court Justice Sandra Day O'Connor decries civics education in America as a crisis. House File 249 requires that civics be offered as a course for credit to juniors or seniors in the state of Minnesota. It places civics under the world's best workforce, including an experiential learning provision. In other words, there's part of this bill that you can learn by doing. You know, students can be given assignments to be election judges and participate in a campaign, things like that. It also has a provision where school districts are asked to report the civics test results. Right now, this test is required to be taken, but it's in some places it may not be. We just don't know. Now, with woeful regularity, researchers confirm Americans' dismal knowledge of civics. In the nationwide poll, 77% of Americans between 18 and 34 couldn't even name one of their U.S. senators. 2/3 of Americans can name at least one judge on American Idol, but only 15% can name the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. 2/3 of Americans can name only one branch of government. 1/3 can't name any. Last week, I witnessed on television a congresswoman from New York saying that there are 3 branches of government: the Senate, the House, and the President. Public schools were established in part to teach civics so that we would have good citizens, the foundation of our republic. But there has been a precipitous decline in civics education in our state and nation. The National Assessment of Progress in Education reports that 4th graders show progress in civics education. 8th graders flatline, and seniors show a decline. The survey reports that 24% of Minnesota's students graduate proficient in education. In other words, 3 out of 4 are not proficient. They don't know how this country works. There are many reasons. The growing emphasis required in math and reading testing, of course, this is very important, but it undermines high-quality civics education, and it comes at its expense. A student can be great at math problems or an expert in literature, but if students don't understand how our government works, all other learning doesn't matter because our republic is in peril. And with that, I will turn to the Senate author of the bill, Senator Carla Nelson.
Thank you, Senator Erdahl. A mistake there. He doesn't want to claim that title, Representative Erdahl. I'm State Senator Carla Nelson. I live in Rochester, represent Olmsted County. That's Rochester, Chatfield, Dover, Yoda, Stewartville, 14 of Olmsted County's townships. And I'm the chairwoman of the Senate Education Committee, both policy and finance. And I'm glad to be supporting and championing this effort in the Minnesota Senate. We know that our democracy, the strength of our democracy, is based upon its citizenry. And the key thing is that our citizens be engaged, they understand how their government works. That's important to the strength of a democracy. We want our children, our students, as they graduate from our high schools, to be participants in government. How does their government work? How can they change things? Rather than just being a victim or saying we don't like how things are, we want our students to understand how their government works, to hold their electeds accountable, and to be involved. That is why I am so pleased to be supporting this piece of legislation. We know that democracies require strong citizens. I'm very concerned when a large number of Minnesota students cannot pass the civics test. Let me tell you about this 50-question civics test. This is the test that our new American citizens take. And we are asking our newest citizens to know this very important information about their new country and how it works and how they can be engaged and powerful in shaping that new government. And yet, we don't even require that our native-born citizens know these very basic, fundamental things about their government. Now, I want to reiterate, as the chairwoman of the Senate Education Committee, I've been very clear that we are not going to mandate unfunded mandates upon our schools. So I want you to understand exactly how this bill works. Our schools are already required, our students are already required to have 3.5 credits of social studies. Civics needs to be a part of that, or a credit. We are not saying how much of a credit, but we are requiring that civics be part of those 3.5 credits that our Minnesota high school students take. Also, as has been noted, the civics test is already required, but the interesting thing is we don't know what those results are. So this bill also has the Department of Education reporting on what % of our students pass this very basic civics test. So again, this is a very common sense bill. It's very needed. I believe the strength of our democracy, our representative democracy, is at peril here. It's critical that we have engaged, informed, and empowered students who can shape their environments through our government. That's why I'm pleased to support this in the Minnesota Senate. Representative Erdahl and I have worked on this issue for several years. I am hoping that this year we can get it across the finish line and start making sure that our kids are prepared to be successful, empowered participants of our representative democracy. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Nelson. And just to clear up one thought you might have. Okay, civics is supposed to be part of the 3.5 credits, but it's not designated as a recipient of any credit. However, how do we teach civics in Minnesota? Some schools do teach it the way I am and Senator Nelson are suggesting. But most, I think, in Minnesota have it in 9th grade. But the fact is, I don't think that they're ready to become voting citizens in 9th grade. Doing it in the junior or senior year is when these students are ready to take that next step and become voters and participants in our democracy. In some schools, they don't designate civics at all. We have standards, but the standards are then just taught in a social studies class, maybe as part of a history lesson about the Constitution. And in some cases, maybe they're not teaching civics at all. We have no way of verifying that because there's no way of verifying if the standard is being taught or not. And so that's the reason for this, to develop a consistent model across the state of Minnesota for how we teach physics and teaching it at the right grade when they're ready to become voting citizens. And now, Secretary of State Simon.
Thank you, Representative Erdahl. I'm Steve Simon, Minnesota Secretary of State. And as Secretary of State, I'd like to say I'm in the democracy business, and this bill is good for business. I want to thank Representative Erdahl and Senator Nelson for their extraordinary leadership on this issue. We live in the greatest country on earth, and not everyone who knows that necessarily acts on that. And maybe they don't even know how anymore. In Minnesota, we're better than most, and in some cases, we're better than all. No one is more fond of reciting the statistic than I am, that Minnesota is #1 in the country in voter turnout and voter engagement, which is great. But in some ways, beyond just voting, our country is coming apart. And many of our civic institutions are shrinking, and our connections with one another are diminishing. This bill can help to weave us together. The bill requires a focus on civic life, on engaging in the public sphere, up to and including voting, and we need that now. Even in #1 Minnesota, we have very high levels, the highest level of voter participation, but that is not evenly and equally distributed across all communities, either geographic or demographic communities. And so we know we have work to do. If we can get more students thinking of themselves as voters, before they even are voters, we will be in much better shape in this state and in this country, and we will have accomplished a lot. So being a citizen and living a meaningful life are about more than earning a paycheck. So school should not be all about job skills. School should also be about building better citizens. This bill helps us reach that goal, and I'm very proud to support it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. I believe next on my list I have the former Supreme Court Associate Justice, Paul Anderson.
Maybe surprising you that the former Supreme Court Justice is here talking about education. When I was on the court, I was in schools and meeting classes 2-3 times a month. I still do it about half a dozen times a year. I'm going to hand out something that gives you my position on civics. Civics education currently suffers from malnutrition, and we need to restore it to health. Proper civics education is the key ingredient to a society. I'm going to elaborate on what the Secretary stated. It's not just educating voters, it's educating citizens, because the definition of civics is the study of the rights and duties of citizens. Now, what I have to say about the need for civics is here, but I'm going to anticipate a pushback to a bill like this. Interesting, I wrote this article for the school board's journal, okay? The school boards tend to push back about this. Well, we got so many other competing interests. We got to do this, we got to do that. Forget it. I've been a school board member. I know what it's like. I've sat in a room with 150, 200 wrestling parents saying that they want a new mat for the wrestling team when I wanted to replace civics books that were 12 years old. It's not easy being on the school board. You've got to make tough decisions. But this is a tough decision that school boards have to make, and if they aren't willing to do it themselves, well, then we've got to send them some direction. And so I'm saying, school boards, do your job. Superintendents, do your job. Let's teach civics so that we have citizens who know their rights and duties.
Thank you.
I'll hand this out to you.
Next up is Dr. Steve Young, the former law school dean at Hamline University.
Thank you, Representative Erdahl. First, may I thank you, Representative, and you, Senator, for your leadership on this issue, not only for us in Minnesota, but as an example for all the 50 states of our union. Our republic is perhaps the most precious thing which humans have created on this earth, and I will not let it die on my watch. The last time our republic was in the serious circumstances that I feel we are in today was after the passage of the Kansas-Nebraska Act in 1854. Then the issues before us were palpable. People were in change. Today, the issues are more vague. It's in our minds and our hearts. Are we training people to have the right kind of minds and the right kind of hearts for our country? My ancestors helped build this country. William Winthrop Young, in April 1775, took the oath to oppose with arms the operations of His Majesty's armies in the North American colonies. Lewis Morris, on my mom's side, signed the Declaration. Governor Morris, and Justice Anderson knows more about my ancestor than I did, wrote the preamble to the Constitution. We have 2 million new Americans that came from the Vietnamese, the Khmer, the Lao, the Hmong, and they're here because of something I did in March 1975. I care about this country, and we have been lackadaisical in raising and educating good citizens, and we are paying the price today. I would prefer to see a full-year course, Representative and Senator, in junior year on civics, on citizenship, on the mind and the heart that's necessary to be a good American worthy of this country. And again, I congratulate both of you for your leadership, and I hope that all our representatives and senators will support this, because it is the function of our legislature to set the expectations for our people. And those expectations need to be high, worthy of a great people. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, Lisa Larson, not Lisa Larson. How about Jennifer Bloom? Not Jennifer Bloom either. They are supportive. They will be testifying in the committee meeting that we have at 2:30, representing the League of Voters and the Learning Law and Democracy Foundation. Any legislators wish to, I believe there's one here.
Hi, my name's Steve Swanson. I taught American government in Minnesota's fine public schools for 33 years. I'll repeat that. I taught American government for 33 years in Minnesota public schools. And there's two reasons I'm here today in support of this bill. Reason number one, during those 33 years, I'd start class every day and I'd say, so can any of you kids name the 5 Simpsons? And everybody, they'd shout out all 5 characters and with pride that they knew that answer. And then I'd ask them, can you name the 5 fundamental principles found in the First Amendment? And they'd yell out press and speech, and then they'd start stumbling because I couldn't answer the rest of the question. And every year, invariably, some wiseacre kid would say, hey, the Simpsons have been on for like 20 years. And I'd remind them that the Bill of Rights have been around for 200 years, but that missed out on that, that insight missed out on them. The other reason I'm here today in support of this bill is Article 13 of the Minnesota State Constitution says a Republican form of government dependent upon the intelligence of the people. It is the duty, it's the only duty in the Minnesota State Constitution of the legislature. A Republican form of government dependent upon the intelligence of the people. It is the duty of the Minnesota legislature to create a general and uniform system of public schools. And add a little semicolon there and say citizenship class required their junior or senior year. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. And I guess this time oh, by the way, I taught 35 years, but we won't dwell on it. I am a former American history teacher as well. Are there any questions?
Well, let me just say, I'm a former teacher too. Although not social studies or history, but a special education teacher and a reading teacher. So lots of teachers here telling you how important this is.
And I did too, and I came down here to speak.
Oh my gosh.
Cut me off.
No, we got one more. This is Greg Matthews, who is a school board member and a former teacher in Litchfield.
To compliment you on what you said about school boards, you're exactly correct. School boards occasionally need prodding and direction, and I hope that transpires. When you made your comments about a year-long course in civics, I agree wholeheartedly with you. It's one of the reasons why I'm here. But that's going to be very difficult to do when the legislature, I think it was 2011, took social studies and moved it from 4 credits to 3.5. So right now we have to pick and choose, and that's very difficult to do. You go back to 1983 and the Nation at Risk, which talked about our curriculum being a smorgasbord or a buffet, and too many students were choosing appetizers and desserts rather than the main course. We seem to be moving in that direction. I hope we can move back. Sorry, guys, I taught for 45 years. But that doesn't give me any seniority over you as far as knowledge and enthusiasm and passion. But I am here for a couple of reasons. Number one, we took civics and we moved it out of the 8th grade to most of our seniors are taking it. We've got a few juniors that are taking it in Litchfield High School that are taking rigorous college classes that they have to kind of juggle their schedule. But basically it's a senior class. And the last couple of years, our instructor, who's very good in a government class, which is a semester long, gave 83 questions from a citizenship and naturalization test. And the kids did abysmally bad on it. At the end of 18 weeks, of those 18 weeks in the semester, he devotes anywhere from about 12 to 14 weeks to civics. And in that time, their scores were brought up appreciably. We are so happy right now that we have moved civics, which we feel should take a priority in social studies, from the 8th and 9th grades up to the 12th grade. Our kids can go into much more depth and detail. They get much more out of it. They're much more enthusiastic because they know that they're voting. You can deal with concepts at a deeper level, a more analytical level. And there's no way we would ever go back to teaching civics in the 8th grade or 9th grade. It has been a real blessing for us. And as I taught, I was always appalled at how ignorant our kids were. regarding their government. I don't mean the federal government, the state government, but local government, and what the roles and functions were and what they could do to make changes and how they could get involved. That's all being done now. And I just hope it's done statewide and perhaps even expanded on. Thank you.
Thank you. And Mr. Matthews, and, you know, I hesitate to add that I missed by 1 year having him as my teacher. I graduated the year before he came to Litchfield.
You're that old?
He's that old. Questions?
I thought you said there wasn't going to be a test. Just kidding. Who designs the curriculum?
Oh, well, the curriculum can be locally developed. I mean, there is still a lot of flexibility for school boards in this bill. I mean, my gosh, there's a civics curriculum on the internet if they need to explore it there. There's the State Department of Education that also can contribute to curriculum design.
Sure, and of course, then there is the civics test that we have our students take. There's a built-in amount of information right there that we would expect and want our students to know.
By the way, there was a news person out here that suggested that legislators be required to take a civics course each year. I won't incriminate that person, but that did come from someone in this group.
I do think that's a good idea. I didn't say that, but I think it's a great idea for us to be aware, too, of our jurisdictional powers as well.
Senator Nelson, how is this different than some of the other curriculum proposals that are out there this year? I mean, there's some that require financial literacy, cursive writing, even affirmative consent. So there's all kinds of different proposals out there. Why is civics different than some of those other proposals? And as the chair of your committee, would you look fondly or kindly on some of these other things that are out there being proposed as well?
Well, that's a very good question. Civics is different because civics, really, as I said, the very strength of our government is dependent upon its citizenry. And as has been said, our Constitution particularly funds or requires education for the very reason of making sure that we have a strong, engaged citizenry. So I believe citizenship, civics is in a class by itself because it's fundamental. It's the baseline. Cursive writing, also historic in many ways, and certainly I support the instruction of cursive writing. We're not going to mandate that. We're going to encourage. There's a big difference up here between mandating and encouraging. Financial literacy, that has not had a hearing in my committee yet, so I can't speak to that. But I do think you bring up a good point. We have to be very careful as we are asking our schools to do more and more. Our schools have a limited portfolio of time. They also have limited funds, and we have to be very cognizant of every time that we ask our schools to do something. There may be funding attached, or there may also be there just isn't enough time to do some of the things they were doing otherwise. But I believe that civics education must be fundamental, and it's one of those building blocks of a strong society. So it's in a class of itself.
The College Board, the organization that does the SAT test, said that there are two things that correlate to success in life and in college. And those two things are learning computer science and the U.S. Constitution.
In terms of your prospects for passage this year, what if any kind of commitments of support do you have from, or conversations have you had in support in DFL leadership in the House and also Governor Walz?
Well, first of all, I feel pretty good about the Senate.
I didn't ask
No, I
always feel good about the Senate, Representative Hurdle.
This is a bipartisan bill. In the House, I am the co-author, so I'm number 1. I am followed by 69 co-authors. So just signed on to the bill. There are enough to pass the bill in the House. But that said, that doesn't always work that way. I assume that after the hearing today, this will be laid over for inclusion, possible inclusion, I like to say likely, but possible inclusion into the Education Omnibus Bill. But the fact that we have, is he still here? Secretary of State Simon, I think, you're still a Democrat, right?
That's the rumor.
Okay. That can be helpful to us. I have a meeting on Thursday with Governor Walz, a retired social studies teacher, and I will be explaining the civics bill to him, and hopefully we'll be getting his support. But we have not been given negative comments from the Department of Education. I've had a meeting with the commissioner, and it was generally positive. So I'm very hopeful that with the bipartisan support evidence for this bill from various quarters, that we'll be able to get it done. I mean, keep in mind, this was in the bill last year that got vetoed at the end as part of the larger education package.
Is this a half, I mean, would this be a half, like a semester or a half semester? Do we know the time commitment here?
Once again, there's flexibility here. I very intentionally, well, at one point it said that a credit showed, but no, that was interpreted as one. Credits can be whatever the school district determines. It just has to be for credit. Now, I can envision a 2-week intensive course on civics that, you know, they give an eighth of a credit to or whatever, that could qualify. But we want to raise the relevance of civics education by having it worth credit and by naming it as a course that they need to take.
And one of the other additional aspects, of course, is then that reporting, so that we have a sense of how our students are doing. And hopefully we will see over time that more and more of our students are what I would say proficient in civics. And I think it's a pretty low bar that we have, but we need to make sure that we are properly giving kids the opportunity to learn, and then that we're getting some accountability in how are those students doing.
Have you talked to folks about what it could mean for pulling civics from 9th grade up to 11th or 12th grade, and if that might offset courses that come afterward? Just thinking on my own experience, I took it as a 9th grader. You sort of need civics to build up to American history, world history, other courses. Have you thought about that or talked to folks about that at all?
No.
I've not focused on the sequencing part of it. I'm very much focused on making sure that all of our kids get civics education.
And it doesn't have to be just all in one basket either. In teaching, I mean, students learn through repetition, but you can talk about the Constitution in 7th grade American history, and it can be touched on again in other areas until you get to that junior, senior year. But yeah, there will be objections from school boards and others. Principals, superintendents, they're not really excited about this. They will object that it's going to affect electives and things like that. In Litchfield, they have 40 to 50 electives available for juniors and seniors who are taking civics. So it can be done. There is flexibility. If school boards want to do this, they can do it. And the fact comes back to this. Whatever we're doing now isn't working. We have 3 out of 4 graduating who don't understand how our government works. And this is not just Minnesota, it's across the country. We've got to do something or we're going to lose a whole generation of people. And that's a serious problem for our country.
Yeah. If I could comment on this and refer to what some people call the 4th branch of our government, of our civics, which is you all, which is the 4th estate. How you report on big things and little things, how you explain or how you fail to explain makes a difference on the level of education of our people. I would also draw the attention of you all and all of us to a distinction between something that's high and principled and something that is down in the weeds. And my feeling is what we have to do is focus on what is high in principle. One phrase is like our core principles, our core values. I mean, the Constitution is what, 6 pages? federal Constitution. The number of pages of court opinions on those 6 pages is thousands and thousands and thousands. It's the Constitution that has the core values and the core principles, which we then have to learn how to apply. And we can apply them differently. We have many things in common. Republicans may want to do it this way. Democrats may want to do it that way when we get down. But if we have together as Americans a sense of core values about human dignity, about freedom, about personal responsibility, about showing up to vote, about voting as an informed person, then the system will work. But if we get too caught up in what divides us, this point of view, this tweet, that tweet, then you get a sense, as we saw particularly, is the history lesson with the Roman Republic. After Cicero, it just kind of slides down and down and down and down and down, and it gets worse and worse. And good people don't really want to stand up. I would ask all of you in the press to go read the poem, The Second Coming, about who is filled with passionate intensity. And it's not necessarily the best people in our society. So this is fundamental. And then I would also like to ask that members of the press, as you reach out, you have your responsibilities too. Thank you.
I need to excuse myself for another meeting, but I do want to just acknowledge that we had a terrific hearing in the Minnesota Senate, and I did listen carefully to our school boards and our school leaders, and we will work to make this civics requirement something that they can implement. They can do so in a cost-neutral way. I think we can do that. I think it's imperative that we do. So thank you very much for having me today.
I want to add a historical footnote, how things are connected. Dean Young's ancestor, Governor Morse, actually did the rewriting of the Constitution. He should get more credit than Madison did. It took 4 days at it. But the Constitution started out to say, we the people of New Hampshire, Massachusetts, whatever, and that was shortened to we the people. And I want to tell you how important that is. That means in our society, sovereignty doesn't rest with the state. It doesn't rest with any other entity other than the people themselves. The people who have power, the sovereign power in our country, are the people. And my heavens, if we don't educate them, what can we expect in the future? And I can quote all kinds of Jefferson and whatever, but we need to educate the sovereign, and that's the people.
If I could just say something again, to respond to your question about could civics be embedded in other courses on the way up rather than strictly a course on civics, certainly it could. But the issue again is time, which we keep coming back to. And right now in Litchfield, we spend at best 2 hours a week on social studies up to grade 5. We are so concerned about the MCA tests, which emphasize reading and mathematics, that we have really neglected, and it's not just Litchfield, I mean, this is statewide, social studies and to a degree even sciences. And again, you know, if we're really concerned about this, then maybe we emphasize social studies a little bit more, and then you have time to embed some of those concepts in there.